And we're broadcasting.
Buenos días y buenas tardes. I'm Sonia Melendez Reyes, and I'm the Associate Director of Policy and Engagement for Hispanics and Philanthropy. Thank you for joining us today as we hold this special webinar for community leaders, funders, and allies. This webinar seeks to create our national call to action to spur thoughtful conversation with community leaders on how they are mobilizing Latinx power and influence across the country. In today's conversation, we'll explore tools and strategies for early voting, addressing the biggest threats to our community, such as voter suppression and escalating violence, planning for a possible contested election, and planning for a rocky administration transition. To lead us in today's conversation, we have our wonderful moderator, Patricia Guadalupe from NBC Latino, who will introduce you to our special guest and our esteemed panel. Patricia, thank you for being here and take it away.
Thank you so much, Sonia. And thank you everybody for being here. And I know this is a very busy time for everyone. And so we're gonna try and keep it moving as quickly as possible. So with that in mind, let me go ahead and introduce our guest speakers today. I want to start first with Natalie Molina Nino. She is the CEO of O-Cubed and is a tech globalization veteran focused on high growth businesses that benefit women and the planet. And she's also the author of Leapfrog, the new revolution for women entrepreneurs. What I'm going to do is go ahead and have you speak for a few minutes, Natalie, and then we can go ahead and introduce our other panelists. And thank you everybody for being here on the call.
Thank you for having me. I will admit, a little bit confused when the wonderful Sonia and Nancy Santiago asked me to attend today, and even more surprised when they said that they wanted me to speak and make some opening remarks. I am, and this is public information, so I don't think this will be a surprise for anybody who follows me, not a big believer in philanthropy. In fact, recently in a live interview, I was asked what my idea of thoughtful, inclusive, and participatory philanthropy looks like. And I said, I loved it. I have a special name for that. It's called pay your damn taxes. And if people like Amazon and so many others, you know, the current occupant of the White House paid their taxes and paid their fair share, we would be in a very different situation. So I say that just to say this is not my world. So I beg for forgiveness of anything that I say that might not be of this world. My world is tech, and my world is now squarely finance. Because, you know, when I think about all of the seemingly intractable problems of our day, I find that at the root of it tends to be lack of funding, and specifically the fact that communities of color are locked out of the economy. In fact, we're systemically prevented from owning homes and building multi-generational wealth and so many other things. The list is long. And if you don't believe me, I would highly suggest reading the work of my colleague and my co-conspirator, Andre Perry at the Brookings Institution, among many other scholars. But his work is incredibly important because it really measures and quantifies just how much racism is costing communities of color. The fact that you can own the exact same home, built the exact same year, the exact same size, but because you happen to be in a community that is predominantly Black or predominantly Latino, your health is worth less. And it is equity of homes that people use to borrow against to start businesses, to borrow against to send their kids to college. There are so many things in that domino effect. So, you know, this is very much my world. And when I think about who manages the total global economy, it turns out that in a recent study, less than 2% of the entire world economy, I'm not talking about the US alone, is managed by women and people of color combined. Less than 2%. People of color are 70% of the world, and we manage less than 2% of the money. Latinos make up more than 16% of the US population, and we definitely do not manage 16% of the US economy. What that means is that, for example, even though 40% of teachers in California are Latinas, likely the people who manage their pensions, which is, by the way, one of the largest pension funds in the world, they do not look like us. They do not think of retirement like we do. They do not have big Latino families like we do. They do not speak our language or understand our cultures and our values. And the same is true for the endowment at the colleges that you all went to. And the same is true for whoever is managing your retirement plan or your 401k. It's our money and we're not in charge of it. So when I think about how we are ever going to be in the driver's seat of the economy, if really we're not owners of our own destiny, because we don't have effectively access to one of the most important things that drives our society, which is money. And I come back to the request from Sonia and Nancy. When they told me to come and talk, I at first was a little bit confused. And then Sonia mentioned that 1.3% of all philanthropic dollars go to Latinx organizations. And given what I know about the world of finance, this was not surprising to me. But given that I'm a capitalist who doesn't necessarily win any awards for being a fan of philanthropy, you might ask me why I care. And the reason that I care is that earlier this year, I was a surrogate for Elizabeth Warren. When she dropped out of the race, I looked for some way to stay engaged with the elections that didn't require that I dive into a specific campaign for a specific candidate. And in the process of figuring out how I might be able to do that, how I still might be active in the process without necessarily diving into one specific candidate's campaign, I discovered an organization that actually is a funder of 2 of the 3 organizations on this call that are going to follow me, called Movement Voter Project. And Movement Voter Project is just one of many organizations that is doing this work. But the reason that I got involved with them is because I knew that more than ever, this year was not just about the White House. It was about campaigns all the way down the ballot with important races in every state. And when I found the organization, I found it through an investor friend, an investor who, like me, looked at political campaigns and saw that for those of us that like to put money into things that matter, and especially things that last, and that will still be there next year and the year after that, and for the next election and the one after that, she and I really came to the conclusion that the best use of our dollars was not putting them into campaigns. It was putting them into organizations just like JOLT and Poder Latinx, which are 2, again, big partners of Movement Voter Project. And Movement Voter Project just last week in fact, just this week, hit a milestone of moving $100 million all distributed into organizations that are led by Black, Latino, Indigenous, and other people of color-led organizations. And again, I ask, right, why does this matter to me? And I would say this: the current White House administration set out to dismantle our democracy. And I think that for non-Latinos in this country, it feels perhaps a little bit far-fetched that democracy might be that fragile. But for those of us with Latin American roots, we know what dismantling democracies look like. And it looks a lot like what we're seeing and what we've seen over the last 4 years. And when I think about my investments in the private sector, in the healthcare space, in the climate change space, in the space of women-led businesses, I realized very clearly that if the current occupant of the White House and all of the people of that ilk remain in power, none of my investments in the private sector have any chance of being successful. They just don't. And it's not just about the next 4 years in the White House. It's about all of the other sub-economies that ultimately impact the whole world and our communities. So for me, it was more than just getting rid of the current occupant of the White House. It was about, what about the next election and the one after that? And it occurred to me that what we need to be building is the infrastructure for democracy. The infrastructure for democracy is exactly what organizations like Gigi's, like Yadira's, and Antonio's are in the business of building for us. And they're building it not in the normal way. They're building it with our cultures, with our language, and with our community in mind. So after the campaigns shut down the day after election, because you know they will shut down the day after the elections, who continues the work? Who stays behind in these communities, building, again, the infrastructure for democracy? Who gets millions of new voters registered, which is what Antonio, Gigi, and Yadira are doing? Who delivers things like, most recently, 4-to-1 is the ratio of progressives to conservatives among infrequent voters like the Latino community who have voted thus far. Who did that? It wasn't the campaigns. It was organizations like the one on this call. In Georgia, the numbers are that 142% of the turnout increase is what we're seeing over 2016, with mail-in ballots up 640%. Again, the campaigns didn't do that. Organizations like Gigi did that. The bottom line for me is that no investment that I will ever make in the private sector has any chance of success without a functioning democracy. And it's my belief that organizations on the ground, led by communities that are most impacted when systems fail, especially systems of democracy, we are the best insurance policy that a capitalist like me can invest in. Which is why, although it's philanthropy, and the money is going to C3s, and in some cases C4s, and although many of us function within a broken tax system that essentially makes it so that many donors are really just looking at this as a kind of way of saving taxes, I would ask that we reframe this. Corporations look at non-revenue and non-profit generating investments like research and development. They look at research and development as something that is necessary for a business to survive. And this is the same thing. Investing in the plumbing and the water for your company's business, it might not be a revenue generating activity, much less a profit generating investment. But your business can't function without plumbing or water, period. Well, this business, which is also my business, and I mean all of your business. I don't just mean the 5% that you donate to philanthropy. I'm talking about the other 95% of your endowment and whatever for-profit businesses ultimately generate the wealth that creates foundations and philanthropic giving. Your business cannot function without a functioning democracy. And in 2020, the infrastructure for our democracy is grassroots organizations like the ones on this call, led by Latinos. We're going to win this election. We're going to defeat and defend the election and anyone who would undermine it. And we're going to make sure that every vote is counted. And because of this infrastructure, we're going to do the same thing in the next election, because this is a commitment that we have to make for the long haul. We're going to build a progressive decade, and I'm honored that Sonia and Nancy and Hispanics for Philanthropy invited me today, even though, again, this is not my world, but I'm honored to say a few words and hopefully get you excited about the speakers that are coming next, because they are absolutely the ones that are saving us all.
Natalie, thank you so much for your very insightful and thoughtful words. And I want to emphasize to folks, we're going to have a little bit of time at the end for a Q&A. If you want to start populating the chat with some questions. But before we do that, of course, we want to hear from our panelists. And let me start first with introducing Yadira Sanchez. She is an advocate for Latinx civic empowerment. She's the co-founder and co-executive director of Poder Latinx, and before that was with Mi Familia Vota, where as a development director, she helped raise more than $20 million to advance civic participation. She's the daughter of immigrants and a graduate of UC Santa Barbara and the George Washington University, where I also have a master's degree from, so yay, GW Colonials. I also want to introduce Gigi Pedraza. She's a social entrepreneur and nonprofit professional with more than 2 decades of experience. The Lima, Peru native is executive director of Latino Community Fund Georgia and was recently named one of the 50 most influential Latinos in Georgia. So congratulations on that award. And Antonio Arellano is a multimedia journalist and human rights advocate. He's a native of Mexico and is the interim executive director of Jolt Action. And previously to that, he was with KTRK, ABC 13 television in Houston. And he uses social media to engage and empower youth. So it's perfect that we continue with these panelists after Natalie's incredible words to get everybody going on what we can do short and long term to engage the community. And the first thing I want to do is ask the panelists, what are you currently doing? And short term, what are your priorities? I want to start with Yadira. And if you could just keep your answers to a couple of minutes so that we can make sure that we get everybody in and have time for questions at the end. So let me ask you, Yadira, what are you doing and what are your short-term priorities?
Good afternoon. Buenas tardes a todos. First, I want to thank Hispanics in Philanthropy for having me today and hosting this very important conversation at such a very critical time. Our organization is dedicated to empowering our Latinx community to get civically involved, to build our own political power, to drive change to our families and our communities. So it's been, I would definitely want to uplift the work of our team that's on the ground right now, risking their lives, really to save our democracy. And just very proud to say that our organization is Latina, it's queer, it's immigrant, and it's youth-led. And our priorities right now, we've been heavily invested in the electoral campaigns, specifically in Arizona, Florida, and Georgia. We have right now a robust operation of over 120 staff on the ground. We were able to complete 40,000 voter registrations, 33 in person, and 8,200 online. And up to this point, we have made over 2 million calls and sent over 2 million text messages to Latinx voters, specifically low propensity and new voters. That's who we're targeting. So our priorities is to get to the finish line November 3rd, knowing that there's a lot of uncertainty post the election. So the short-term priorities from now on is doing the ballot chase. Like, we're making sure that our community right now, we're calling them, letting them know that to drop off their ballots at the box, at the voting box, at the polling locations. We're racing against the clock. So we don't have, the mail, regular mail to be an option anymore. Also, we're continuing to mobilize folks to vote early in the states that can. Some of the states are no longer able to vote early, but definitely making the final push to get folks to the polls on November 3rd. And I mean, that's our top priority right now when it comes to short term.
Okay.
And some of this, I'll pause there to give my colleagues some time to respond.
Okay. Well, it sounds like you're obviously extremely busy, just like everybody here, with the race against the clock. Speaking of, Antonio, what are you up to, and what are your short-term priorities, and emphasis on short?
Great question, Patricia. Thank you so much. And thank you for, again, Hispanics in Philanthropy for having all of us today. Greetings from Texas, the state that is leading the nation in early voter turnout across the country. And it's being led by Latinx folks, young folks. At Jolt Initiative, we are focusing diligently on maximizing and getting out the vote. As you all have alluded to, the rush to the finish line is on. We are phone banking, block walking. We're knocking on 2,000 doors per day in Austin, Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, targeting 75,000 homes before November 3rd. Phone banking, block walking, text banking, and mobilizing our 22,000 members to virtual volunteer hours, trying to maximize our impact in the Lone Star State.
Wonderful. Thank you, Antonio. And Gigi, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're doing and what are your short-term priorities right now?
Thank you, and thank you for this opportunity. Hello from Georgia. ¿Cómo están a todos? Our organization, it's really focused in making sure that people understand civic engagement is defined, but every everything and anything that you do to ensure your rights and your community and your family's interests are respected. So, you know, Georgia is home of a vibrant and young community that is turning out to vote, to participate, leading, actually, Latinos under 40 in Georgia are leading turnout in person and by absentee ballots nationally by 7%. We are also, just like my colleagues are doing, knocking doors, texting people, but we are also focused on election protection, ensuring that the voter experience is protected, that people feel supported, and that people know that we care about themselves. Latinos are important because they are human beings, and we work with grassroots organizations building power so that they know we don't just care about their vote, we care about the entire voter, like my friend Cliff Albright says, that, you know.
All right, Gigi, thank you so much. And you know, it's interesting that the what all of you are doing with making sure that voter turnout and with the youth vote. Already, I think the numbers this morning were close to 80 million people have already voted, including a record number of young people and people of color. And you happen to be in one of the key states, you, Gigi, and also Antonio, where the Texas, for the first time in a long time, is considered a toss-up. And that's where I wanted to start with you, Antonio, on our second question. What are you doing to pivot away from what you usually do? I mean, this isn't the first time that folks are doing civic engagement and outreach, but this is the first time that we're doing it in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of what Natalie was mentioning, a not very friendly administration, to put it very politely. What would you, well, yeah, let's start with what are you doing differently, and what has worked and what hasn't worked? Let me ask you first, Antonio, and then we'll ask the rest of the panel. Since the start of the pandemic.
The pandemic definitely threw a big wrench into our plans. Undoubtedly, we've had to mobilize and pivot very quickly. We're fortunate at Jolt to come with a very young workforce. It's 96% female-led, and the majority of our members are under 35. So we have a digital generation of young Latina women leading the charge at Jolt that understand technology, understand the need to innovate. And so that's what we've done. We've quickly adapted a digital organizing model that has helped us reach more than 500,000 Latinos through targeted ads and through digital and social media campaigns. We are working with artists to produce culturally competent content to pierce through all the negative and toxic rhetoric. We are operating in one of the most toxic political environments in the country. Our Latino community here in Texas has literally been targeted. It was just last fall that we saw a man drive from Dallas to El Paso to shoot and kill Mexicans. And so our communities know what it's like to be in the crosshairs of this racist and discriminatory attacks. So Jolt is doing everything to remind them of their power, to remind them that the reason that their power is trying to be diluted is because they are the biggest threat to the status quo. It's because we are uniquely positioned to become the majority within the next decade in the state of Texas. And you're seeing young Latino voters come out like never before because they are empowered and because they're being mobilized by organizations like Jolt that are culturally speaking to their needs and addressing their concerns.
What has worked and what hasn't worked for you, Antonio, as far as when you're pivoting with the whole COVID-19 pandemic? And then I'll get to our other panelists and ask them the same thing.
Right. Prior to COVID, we had in-person volunteer hours every week in our offices. Unfortunately, due to COVID, we have had to pivot to virtual volunteer hours, and it's allowed us to reach more people. Like I mentioned, we have an active 22,000 members across the state that are joining our Zoom calls, and through that, activating and mobilizing their family and friends. We also realized that this election cycle, we are embracing DM messaging as opposed to email messaging campaigns. The targeted audience that we reach, 18 to 32-year-old Latinos in Texas, are not really opening their emails, but they are opening their DMs. And so we're targeting them to Twitter, to Instagram, through Facebook. We're sending them culturally competent messages that give them the information that they need to go safely to the polls. Additionally, from that, we're making sure that, like I said, the message resonates on the issues. This election cycle, we're not focused on the candidates as a C3 organization. We're focused on healthcare, immigration reform, climate change, the economy, gun safety, messages that resonate with the community. And we're doing this to mobilize Latinos in low propensity Latino neighborhoods to prove to statistics that Latinos care about more than immigration. Yes, it's near and dear to our hearts. And here in Texas, we're gonna fight that fight head on. But we also care about a variety of other topics. Latinos are culturally, ideologically, and linguistically diverse, and we're prepared to meet all of those needs.
All right, wonderful. Let me ask you the same question to you, Gigi. What have you been doing to pivot away from, well, not really away from, but do something different than what you've been doing because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and what has worked and what hasn't worked? And what can you tell local organizing groups about what they can do?
Thank you. So for us, it's actually doubling down on what we started doing 4 years ago, which is to work in partnership and collaboration and investing in direct service organizations and community groups and folks on the ground that are responding and reacting to the realities of their own diverse Latinx and immigrant communities in Georgia. For us, the pandemic, what it did is it created an opportunity to strengthen our relationships and double down on what we knew worked, which is to provide wraparound services, direct referrals, direct connection to people that have not only questions about the census and about voting, but questions about their PTA and how to support their kids in school. And like Antonia said about COVID, and working with public health organizations to provide, testing, centered on the realities of people on the ground, on immigrants, on Latinx, with in-language services, food distribution, and make the connection with how those efforts and how policies directly impact the lives of people. So for us, election protection, right? We are there ensuring that people have water, that people have snacks, that we are connecting them to attorneys on the ground. We're part of the state voices table in Georgia, Pro Georgia, that has already engaged people and do phone calls and texts and canvassing more people, touching more people than 2016, 17, and 18 combined. So we know and recognize that we're part of a larger network of folks working in solidarity to make things better on the ground.
Great. And are you going to be delivering pizzas or doing electric side dances at the polls like some other groups are?
No, I am actually volunteering, as a poll monitor the day of the election. I did yesterday, and I have to do later today to ensure again that the voter experience is protected, that there is interpretation, translation, and that we train other folks so that, we are there for people when they need us.
All right, wonderful. See, those are the kind of concrete sorts of examples that groups that are on this call are looking for. And let me ask you, Yadira, what are some of the things that you're doing that are different because of the COVID-19 pandemic? What has worked and what hasn't worked? What would you recommend for groups to do?
Yeah, so I'm gonna pretty much similar to Antonio, COVID completely threw a curveball at us, and we did not see it coming. And from overnight, we had to reinvent ourselves. We went from an in-person canvassing operation on the ground with 60 people already registering our community to turning remote. And unlike Jolt, our organization is over 90% Latina, but it ranges. It's not on the canvassing team. It's not all youth led. So our biggest challenge is training our canvassers to be on the same tech level, and that was a challenge for our organization. We devoted a lot of hours, many hours, to training on computer, on iPads, on downloading applications, because our community, technology-wise, was not all there. We weren't at the same level, but we wanted to make sure we provided the resources for everyone to be comfortable doing the work remotely. So that was the first thing we did. We halted in-person operations, and we turned all our team to remote phone banking, remote text banking, using relational organizing to reach out to our communities and to continue building momentum, because we could not just completely pause the operation. It also forced us to go digital. We got creative and designed a Votar es Poder campaign, multi-layered, culturally speaking to our communities and the segments within our community. We launched the Voter Drag Squad, very tailored to the LGBTQ community in Arizona, bringing together drag entertainers to make sure we were being inclusive and being diverse of our community. We also created a webcomic in partnership with Somos Arte, which was La Borinqueña, specifically targeting the Puerto Rican and youth community. And most recently, we have created and launched a digital art gallery, uplifting Hispanic Heritage Month, but also promoting the importance of voting early. And of course, it was a last push for voter registration. And lastly, Las Cafeteras, we music video we did in partnership with them, making sure that we were using our art, our culture, and diversity to reach low propensity and new voters. And what we saw that worked is definitely not having a one message tailored to all, because we're not monolithic. We noticed that also had to be very tailored to the states and the demographics we were trying to reach. So overall, the training has been very successful. Our phone bankers now, I want to say they're pros at phone through talk, through text. Everybody has learned a new skill set. We had to rely on Zoom and webinars, and now our folks can go into the production business because we've developed new skills we didn't think we would need to develop in the midst of COVID. And our folks have now continued engaging our community through social media channels. As Antonio mentioned, we have been relying heavily on social media, targeted ads. We relied on tech companies to target our folks on their iPads or through OTT, over the top messaging.
Let me ask you, because I mean, we're talking a little bit about, you know, moving away from in-person and close contact. I mean, what do you do with organizations or even just or folks who don't have the type of access to technology that a lot of folks have? And this is a real big problem in the Latino community. Let me ask you to expand on that a little bit, Yadira, and then we'll go to Antonio and Gigi about that.
Most definitely, there is a tech divide in our community, and that's why we made it one of our goals to develop a strong relationship with Spanish media. And we just want to be thankful of the partnership we've received through Univision, who has opened the door, the living room, to many homes, many Latino homes all over the country, where we've been able to share our content, knowing that if they didn't have access to a computer or a phone, you know, the viewership of Univision is 65 million, and we were able to closely do partnerships with Spanish media. So that's one form of method. And of course, we didn't stop calling folks. So we didn't rely on social media and just making sure the folks, we continue doing the traditional way. Also, as Gigi mentioned, we hosted food banks. And through the food banks, we continue registering people, making sure they got counted for the census. And then of course, continue doing the relational organizing to make sure everybody had the voting information.
Okay, and what about, let me ask you, Gigi, about the same thing with the technology.
Yeah, I actually had a comment, because this is why I think grassroots and local leadership, it's important, right? Univision in Georgia only gets to Middle Georgia. It doesn't get to South Georgia, Middle Georgia, or even Northern Georgia. So for us, it's having those core organizations that we work in collaboration to ensure that they are knocking on the doors. And because they are from the community, people will open the doors, will talk to them, you know, will connect on, you know, just events, PTA, or even school related, you know, efforts and campaigns. So, you know, for us, yes, of course, you know, ethnic media, but also in language, recognizing the diversity of our communities and where states are. So in Georgia, for example, we are the only organization that has been working in 3 Mayan languages to ensure not only that folks can vote if they are able to vote, but that they can advocate, they can call their elected officials, right? They can engage in the PTAs, in their local boards of education, in their cities, in their schools. We are the only organization that has 4 navigators and outreach folks in South Georgia, you know, working to do, yes, civics education, but also, you know, information on financial support, financial assistance and advocacy, you know, to deal with healthcare bills and healthcare questions. And so those are the important connections and confluence that we have in our organization, you know, to ensure that the voters, and frankly, the individuals, not only the voters, because again, civic participation is defined broadly for us, right? I connected with, you know, yes, protect, defend, and build, right? The economic opportunity, but also people's democracy, which is a lot more than just showing up, you 3 weeks before the election to make sure that people vote. This is about year-long efforts, and responsible efforts to ensure that people receive the support that they need to live their lives, so that then they can feel that they belong and turn out to vote.
Great. And Antonio asking you the same sort of question about the access to technology. And what do you, maybe a tip for supporting Latinx organizations when, the Hispanic community, Latino community, Latinx community, however you want to call them, is extremely diverse?
Absolutely. And, I'm glad that we're talking about the lack of access to technology, the lack of access to Wi-Fi for a lot of our folks. At Jolt, we recognize that the phone banking and block walking model that America's democracy is founded on was created to mobilize one key constituency, middle-class white voters. And we're not middle-class white voters. So at Jolt, we recognize that it's important to innovate voter registration and not solely focus on phone banking and block walking. And the one way that we've done this is we've been mobilizing voters for this election since 2019, for over a year. And prior to COVID-19, we are the only organization in the country that was doing voter registration at quinceañeras. Our Poder Quince program is one of the most powerful civic engagement programs in the nation. We went into hundreds of quinceañeras in Dallas, Austin, Houston, and we prepared young women of color to give passionate speeches during those events. La quinceañera normally gives a brindis, and during her brindis, she would say, I pledge that when I become of age, I will vote to defend my community. And I'm calling on you, abuela, abuelo, tío, tía, to let your gift to me be your registration to vote. Jolt is there on site, ready to register them to vote. It's been one of the most successful programs that we've had. And after COVID-19, when we were not able to go to quinceañeras, we created the Beyond the Quince program. Texas, unfortunately, did not stop in-person school. So high schools are open and students are back in class. And so we're doing voter registration on high school campuses. In Texas, there is a state law that requires all high schools to do voter registration twice a year. And Jolt is helping with the accountability and making sure that all high schools in the state of Texas are being held accountable and producing in-person voter registration to those who are eligible. And then we're going back and doing GOTV. Aside from that, earlier in the year, Jolt was very involved in the census count. We recognize that this is a once-in-a-decade opportunity to mobilize our constituency. And we went back to those neighborhoods that we had talked to them about their power in the census and started talking to them about consolidating their power by voting. And so what we're doing is building long-term infrastructure, the foundation that Natalie talked about earlier, making sure that Latino community in Texas knows that there is a new organization in the state that is prioritizing their needs and that is here for the long haul.
That quinceañera idea is fabulous. You go to churches and libraries and other places like that to register folks. And where else are you going to find Latinos in a large group besides a church and a party? But a quinceañera, that's perfect. That's a great idea. And hopefully when all of this pandemic ends, well, you'll be able to do a little bit more of that in person. I wanted to ask you, speaking of holding folks accountable, what are your organizations doing post-election to deal with the possibility of a contested election, of a violent, demonstrations in the streets, considering that you have a administration that is basically inciting folks to do these kinds of things? Let me start with you, Gigi, and then I'll ask Jadira and then Antonio. What are you doing?
So for us, our entire team of civic participation educators and all programmatic team, we have all taken crisis management communications specific webinars around first of all, how to educate folks. And we started doing this last week so that people know what to expect, right? And to ensure that we remain calm and follow the appropriate avenues to ensure that we have first the correct information. There was a comment about misinformation that is a huge issue in our community in Georgia, and we want to make sure that everything that we share, it's relevant, accurate, right, and has been double and triple checked. Second is really, frankly, work in collaboration and solidarity with all the organizations in the state that have been working in civic participation for a long time to ensure that we have a message and a plan, like we said, to protect, defend, reduce harm, and mitigate any damage and any potential violence that may exist. For us, also our election protection work, we have 35 volunteers working at polling locations that have high density of Latinx across the state, primarily in Metro Atlanta. And what we are doing is ensuring that, again, we have everything in the toolkit to ensure that all experiences that may be, where we may be able to challenge or document issues of voter suppression or other, similar behavior, have a path to attorneys, to folks that are going to be, documenting and possibly carrying litigation like we have done in previous elections. And finally, we remain committed to work. We know that in Georgia, likely it's going to be a runoff. There are 2 seats in the Senate. So, our team, knows that they are here for the long run, and we're going to and expect to be working throughout December and throughout January. And frankly, after the election, to ensure that we keep, the system of checks and balances, with folks in office and appointed, make sure our rights are respected.
Great, thank you, Gigi. Let me ask you the same question, Yarida. What is your organization doing to prepare for a possible contested election, possible demonstrations, even, God forbid, violence?
Yeah, I mean, I second a lot of the things that Gigi mentioned. We're also doing a voter protection. We're right now have been training over 40 poll watchers to make sure that they are available, bilingual, provide language access to our community. We also know that post-election in states like Georgia and Arizona, possibly Florida, if there's any ballot hearing that needs to happen immediately after the election. So it's very important for us to keep our current capacity. We can't just ramp down like we're usually on election years. We ramp up and then ramp down on November 4th. We cannot afford to do that in this election because the next 48 hours post-election will have a significant impact on closed elections. That could be down the ballot. Also organizers, we would need to have organizers on the ground to capture stories. We're working with Latino Justice and other legal partners to make sure if there's folks that were turned away at the polls, that we're capturing those stories. If lawsuits need to go in place, that we're having the proper legal representation to make sure that we're able to uplift those stories and really get justice for our community. And then of course, we're also thinking protection-wise, we have been in partnership with many coalitions that are right now keeping a close watch on these militia groups that are organizing in certain key states and that are really just trying to instill fear in our community. And unfortunately, this is a big, humongous problems for our community. Because if you all been watching the polling, we're reporting these massive numbers, but where does our community lie in those numbers? 77 million people voted, of our community voted. And we just had this conversation with Antonio prior to this call that we need to find that data. And it's very important because that means our folks might be voting on election day, and we need to be ready and make sure that our folks feel safe and secure when voting on election day. So that's why the poll monitoring, the poll watchers are so important, not to, just have our folks go out and vote without feeling like there is a support and network out there for them.
Great, thank you, Dadita. And let me ask you the same thing, Antonio, before we go to Q&A with our audience. What are you doing, your group doing, to ensure that, to prepare for the possibility of a contested election?
Yeah, so I think that this is a multi-pronged approach that we have to take. One, we have to be proactive against disinformation, right? Number one, we have to make sure that people are aware of all of the tactics and intimidation tactics that are being utilized against our community. Similar to what we saw during the census with the threat of a citizenship question, we're seeing, threats and intimidation tactics that are trying to dilute the power of the Latino constituency in this election cycle. We want to make sure that we are informing our community and educating our community so that they feel empowered to go cast their ballot safely and know that their vote vote will count, okay? I think that it's important that as civic engagement organizations, we put an end to this negative rhetoric that tries to perpetuate a sense of instability or insecurity within our elections. We know that voter fraud is very unlikely in this country, and we know that the reason that it's being promoted or shared or discussed is because the president is setting this agenda, right? So that's number one. Number two, we need to make sure that we are ready for de-escalation tactics and messaging right after the election. Listen, emotions are running high. People are really invested in this election in whatever side of the aisle you land on. And we need to make sure that we have and continue with a peaceful transition of power that this nation is founded on. Moving forward, JOLT will have a positive and empowering, uplifting message to our members. And it's important that we have a cohesive message as Latino, Latinx organizations across the country about do not turn out to riot or to protest, and making sure that our Latino community and constituency is well informed of how to move forward. At this point, we're also following the lead of civic rights organizations within the state, letting them draft the legislation and legal potential lawsuits that could be proposed after this if the results are not validated. Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you. Well, we have a question from the one of the audience members asking about where are these kinds of conversations happening in the Spanish-speaking community to make sure that people are plugged in, you know, that they know what's going on, that obviously there is a very large chunk of the community that's predominantly Spanish speaking. So I wanted to go ahead and throw that question out to any one of the three of you. Where is this happening in the Spanish language community?
I mean, I'm happy to start. You know, in Georgia, the majority of Latinos are like me, right? Adult Latinos, immigrants, English learners. And so for us, ethnic media, it's critical. There are lots of, you know, local, small, ethnic Spanish, you know, centered, you know, radios, digital platforms that are deeply, deeply invested in the process, by the way, who have not received investment from none of the campaigns, right? Which is one of the reasons why it's so important, that work that we do locally. So that community organizations, again, you know, folks that when somebody is hungry or has a domestic violence issue, you know to call to, those organizations are hosting and incorporating civic participation advocacy issues in Spanish in their work groups, right? PTAs, you know, groups of parents advocating. That's where the conversations happen. And frankly, you know, in our Facebook page, our team, you know, like Antonio and Yadira said, is, you know, vast majority, you know, Latina is very diverse. We have veterans, we have members of the LGBTQ community. We actually are all from different places, you know, our heritage from Latin America. And we also make space for groups, particularly, you know, reaching to communities, for example, Northern Mexican or Puerto Ricans or Venezuelans that are recent immigrants, to ensure that, again, that we speak not only Spanish at large, but, you know, the way that Venezuelan folks, you know, look at things, with our Venezuelan staff member facilitating the conversation. So again, you know, very localized, very targeted, very specific efforts happening in the state.
Let me ask the panelists here about what are you doing to connect with other communities of color, African American community, Asian American, you know, not just to move the agenda forward, but to hold elected officials accountable. You know, this is an election year. If everyone promises all kinds of things, like they say in Spanish, villas y castillas, meaning everything on the table. So what are you doing to connect with other groups? Let me ask you that, Yadira.
Yeah, definitely coalition work is very important to us. In Florida, we created the Black and Brown Ballot Access Coalition, very much so Black and Brown communities could be leading the conversation on voter protection work, on what is the plan for recruitment, knowing that our communities would be targeted and they would be the ones most to lose, with everything the president has been mentioning on his Twitter feed. So definitely building coalitions, also working through the tables with other partners. We're part of the State Voices network in Florida and in Arizona, One Arizona in Arizona, and definitely working with the other partners. We built coalitions around paid leave. We know that we've been struck by COVID. Our community has received a huge number of unemployment as a response because we're essential workers. Our community has been, the backbone of our economy during this very critical time. So definitely working in coalitions because we're definitely stronger together when it comes to issues that unite our communities. That's where we've seen our strongest partnerships.
What about the issue of racism and colorism within the Latino community, the Afro-Latinos who feel that they're marginalized and such? What is your organization, Antonio, doing to work in that particular to make more people feel a little bit more inclusive within the Latinx, Latino community?
Bueno, Patricia, para contestar la pregunta que de dónde están pasando las conversaciones en español, están pasando aquí en Hispanics and Philanthropy, y están pasando en la página de JOLT, están pasando en nuestras organizaciones, pero lo que necesitamos es inversión para que tengamos la oportunidad de continuar esas conversaciones en español y en cualquier otro idioma que sea necesario. Acerca del tema del racismo, número uno, tenemos que hablar acerca del racismo que existe dentro de nuestra propia comunidad latina y el racismo que existe dentro de la comunidad latina que ataca a la comunidad afro-latina. La comunidad afro-latina es parte de nosotros y en nuestra organización, yo recientemente, después de todos los ataques en contra de la comunidad afro-latina y afroamericana en los Estados Unidos, en particularmente a manos de los policías, nos movilizamos y empezamos a hablar acerca de este tema con los jóvenes latinos que nosotros representamos para que ellos mismos sepan que tienen el poder en sus manos de no nada más decidir la próxima elección presidencial, pero decidir qué tipo de acción vamos a tomar y cómo vamos a cambiar drásticamente el futuro de esta nación.
Mira qué bien. Y obviamente, definitivamente tenemos que tener una conversación más a menudo en español y muchas gracias por tus comentarios. And what we're basically saying there is that, we should have more of these conversations, definitely in Spanish, to get more of the Spanish language community out there. And especially among a lot of the new voters, the marginalized voters, of the disenfranchised folks. Let me ask, any one of you, what exactly, what do you think as far as this historic number of early voters? The emphasis has been on how everyone is very enthusiastic about voting, and that's why they're voting in such large numbers, but there's very little coverage or stories about how people shouldn't be waiting 3 or 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours to wait to vote. And a lot of those, that's happening in marginalized communities. For instance, in Texas, one drop-off ballot box per county means in Harris County, you have to drive, 2 hours to drop off your ballot box. What exactly are organizations such as yours doing to, address this whole particular issue of focusing on, there's something undemocratic about having to wait so long in line? Let me throw that to you, Jadira, to start off.
Yes, completely agree with you. We have been seeing, especially by the media, this romanticization of long lines that are 6 hours. Who in our community has 6 hours to be in line and during a pandemic? I mean, it's really outrageous that this is happening, especially during a year that we've lost so many lives. But it's definitely also made it very clear that they do not want our community to vote. So we've been using that message. our vote is powerful. Like, we have the power to change our future for our families and our communities. So we've been very much focusing on early voting. We were a proud founding member of Vote Early Day, and we did a humongous push to get everyone to vote early. And in states that have vote early days till the last day, we've been pushing folks not to wait until the last day, because with this pandemic, there's so much uncertainty that we do not want to risk not voting on election day. But definitely, we also know that all states are different, and what we see long lines in Georgia, in Arizona are as well different. Like, Pebble is in full effect, and we've been pushing folks to drop their pebbles to make sure that their vote is counted and they don't have to do the long lines. So that's, tailoring from state to state.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And this has been a wonderful conversation, but of course, time flies, and we're getting towards the end of doing this. And Sonia, we will have to do this again another time real soon. Y haz uno en español también para la comunidad que habla español. I wanted to ask a couple of very quick final thoughts on what's next. And let me ask you, Antonio, if people want to know more about your organization, where can they go to? And just a real quick, 30-second final thought.
You can go to joltinitiative.org or follow us online on social media as Jolt Initiative on Twitter or Facebook. We're happy to have you join the movement of young Latinos in Texas that are transforming the Lone Star State. And my closing message is this: historically, Latinos have been told that we have to wait for our success, that in the future we're going to be powerful, that in the future we're going to be unstoppable. I'm here to tell you that the future has arrived, and we refuse to wait any longer to be brown, black, and brilliant. Mi gente, we're soon to be the majority of the population in this country, and it's important that we invest in grassroots organizations across the state that are focused on mobilizing and empowering and educating Latinos, Latinas, and allowing Latina women to also lead us in that direction, like we see in this panel today full of powerful Latina women. Thank you for having me, and we look forward to having you all join our movement in Texas.
Well, you really need to make a bumper sticker and t-shirt of the brown, black, and brilliant. That's awesome. How about real quick, Gigi, if people want to know more about your organization, and a real quick final thought?
Thank you. Yes, the Latinos for Democracy Coalition is Latino-led, Latino governed, Latino serving effort in Georgia of 6 organizations across the state, working, all year, even when elections are not sexy and there are not dollars, to engage community and educate community. We know that, the voter share of Latinx and AAPI communities have doubled since 2014, and we know that what we are doing works. We know that in 2018, the people that we contacted through our strategies and tactics turn out at 54%, right? Which is 25% more than Latinos in Georgia that were not contacted through our strategies. So invest in us, look at us, and we're here to stay. Thank you.
Thank you, Gigi. And to you, last but not least, Yadira, if people want to find out more about your organization, and a real quick final thought.
Yes, if folks want to learn more of our organization, we invite you to come to our website, poderlatinx.org, check out our digital art gallery. And just as a closing remarks, this election has so much at stake. Our organization will be working down to the last minute, and post-election, that's where the work really begins. Our organization is year-round. Civic engagement, we build roots in the states that we're in, where don't fly in and fly out. It's very important for us to use this political capital that we're building this year to really make changes at the local level, to have our communities be the center of those fights, because they need to see their civic power in full effect. And November 4th, that's when that work will begin. So we urge you, if you all have grantees, it's not too late. These last 5 days could define the next 4 years. So we're very excited to say that on November 1st, we'll be having a National Latina Civic Engagement Day of Action. We'll be at the Capitol, our nation's capital, uplifting the lives, remembering those folks that we have lost, but letting all Latinas across the nation know that it's not over. It's over until we say it's over, and we have the power to change that.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank all the panelists. And Natalie had to leave to actually go vote. So she's doing her civic engagement in a very personal way. But I want to thank all the panelists for being here today. Some really good thoughts about that and actions, call to actions. And I wanted to end this with a few remarks from Amalia Brindis Delgado, who is the Assistant Vice President of Strategy, and we'll close it out with her. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, all our panelists. What an incredible conversation. I just wanted to take a couple minutes to talk a little bit about what HIP has been doing to support our panelists and support the vote for this very important election. And you know, we heard from organizations that we're supporting. We encourage you to support these organizations, get involved. They're all the websites we're on the chat, and they're on Facebook, so we'll continue to share those. And definitely heard about wanting to have this conversation in Spanish. Lo seguimos hablando, lo seguimos discutiendo para que podamos aumentar el poder de nuestra gente. And thank you for everybody who joined. We continue to also support our organizations in this past year, particularly in response to COVID. We supported 13 community-based organizations in 9 states and in Puerto Rico to push for fair and accurate census and to inform and engage our Latino voters. Like we heard today, this is beyond the election. Power building moves throughout the year, every year, and we need to do this hand in hand with our allies, with our accomplices, Black, Indigenous, Brown, gender justice movements, and others. And so we look forward to working with all of you, and thank you. Go out and vote, vota conmigo. We can do this, si se puede. Gracias a todos.
Thank you. Yes, definitely go out and vote. Thank you, everybody, for being here, and don't forget to vote. If you haven't voted already, go and do it. Thank you. Bye-bye.